it's been so long.
Hi.
Okay, now I see a lot more people. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Let's get started up.
Okay. Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Women's History Conclave. The conclave, as some of you may know, has started its journey in October 2020 as an online platform for engagement with women's history. This is one of the good things that the pandemic has given us. As conveners of the conclave, Dr. Bhaswati Chatterjee and myself, Apurna Bandyopadhyay, felt overjoyed when Professor Swapna Banerjee proposed that we host a book celebration event for her recently published volume, and we happily agreed. The book, as you all know, is named Mapping Women's History, Recovery, Resistance and Activism in Colonial and Post-Colonial India. This book honors the contributions of Professors Barbara Ramusa and Geraldine Forbes, the unquestionable foremothers of women's history, women historians who dedicated their entire lives to reclaim the history of Indian women, recuperate their voices, and rehabilitate them to the pages of history. The book has been jointly edited by Professors Padma Anagol, Paula Banerjee, and Swapna Banerjee, and has been published by Stree earlier this year. Now, let me share with you, Professor Geraldine Forbes is a founder member of the Women's History Conclave and literally our friend, philosopher, and guide. Bhaswati and myself have recently edited a fresh script for her, Our History in honor of Professor Geraldine Forbes, and was published by Sampark in March 2022. Now, as the editor's documents Stree has introduction volume, emotions are crucial to women's history. Warmth, friendship, giving and sharing, trust, etc., form important vectors of feminist change. And our initiative today stems from a bond of love and friendship that transcends all divides, that encompasses feminist historians located in widely disparate regions of the globe. Now, I will not speak further. I will now request Professor Swapna Banerjee and Professor Paula Banerjee to moderate the session. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Good day, good evening, good morning from our part of the world. But it is indeed a great pleasure to be part of this celebration of the collected volume of essays that were written to honor Barbara Ramusa and Geraldine Forbes, our professors and foremothers, our dear Barbara and Jerry. My heartfelt thanks goes to Women's History Conclave and their conveners, Dr. Apurna Bandyopadhyay and Bhaswati Chatterjee, for hosting us and being so generous with their time to be a part of this celebration. My special thanks also goes to the publisher, Stree, and especially to Ms. Andira Sen, who heads this. My special thanks publishing also, that I have many more thanks to give, but very briefly. Last night, Jerry reminded me that the process a decade ago, Professors Mrinalini Sinha, Antoinette Burton, Sanjay Maluwalia, and I co-conspired to host a dual panel at the annual Southern Map. Way back, it was 2012, the organizing and and planning took mostly Mrinalini Sinha and Antoinette Burton handled behind the scene, and that resulted in the convening of the annual South Asia conference, not the convening of the two panels, the dual panels at the annual South Asia conference in Madison in 2013. So we had participants from 3 different continents and 3 different generations, senior scholars, mid-career academics, and budding historians from India, Bangladesh, UK, and the US participated and presented their papers on different stages of their research on different areas of women's history and from very different contexts. The papers, although very distinct and diverse, were all tied by an underlying connection. And that connection was the influence and the touch of Barbara and Jerry. I hardly did emphasize that both panels were a great us, especially I think the plan came from Professor Padmanabhan to create a volume out of those papers. So today, in many ways, is a culminating process, is a culminating moment that brings us all together. I won't take too long, but I cannot conclude without thanking and showing our indebtedness to all the contributors. We faced serious odds in completing the volume, but we never lost hope. Our contributors have been spectacular, not only with their submissions, but they complied to a numerous requests to edit and resubmit their works, and that includes Barbara and Jerry. I don't know how many times we made them rework on their article. Initially, it was a jointly written piece, but then we decided to split them. All those stories will come out from them. I don't need what they went through and what all the contributors, Sanjam in particular, could attest to that, who worked until the very last minute of our piece. So I'm deeply grateful to them, and I have been the mediator in most of the cases. That was both challenging but rewarding at the end. So it was a very rewarding process on the whole for me. While paying homage to my mentors, we also forged strong bonds of sisterhood and camaraderie in the process. So with my thanks to everyone, let me now turn the floor over to the other co-editors. So Paula.
Thank you, Swapna. Thank you very much. As Swapna said, the journey began 10 years back, a decade back, but actually it began much earlier than that. I remember meeting Swapna as a young undergraduate in Presidency College, meeting Barbara, and she was always stylish to boot. That was the first thing you noticed about Barbara. And Barbara was the person that I met in graduate studies, and we were so awe-inspired. And that itself should be a pointer to what feminist work is all about. It's very relational. It's very personal. And that is why from Barbara, we not only learned about style, and style in all formats, writing, speaking, and Professor Bharati Ray, that's why calls me a seminar personality, but it was all Barbara. And then I met her very best friend, Geraldine Forbes. And these two eternally young women were so cool that as graduate students, we felt, oh my God, we feel we're older than them. So, this relationship that we struck years and years and years back stayed on. It was fashionable to remain in the United States. But these were the two people who inspired me to go back to my country and give whatever I learned to India. And I pulled back to Frank. And these were the people who ways by giving me recommendation letters, preparing me for my life. And so, I'm eternally grateful to them. All people here, at least and through journey, angry sort of create or I come down. And be so grateful to Barbara and Jerry. And when we got the chance, and it was my Fulbright year, that this fellowship, sort of started. And Swapna called me up and said, would you like to present the paper? And I jumped. I said, yes, of course. And went there. And that is when we said, hey, the papers are so great. We need a volume. And in 3 different corners of the world, Swapna in United States, in England, in Wales, we got together and hatched this plot. We had many changes, many evolutions, but it had to fully FEM project. Initially, we thought we'll go further. Both of us lost our parents in the process, but the projects, then Mundiradi and Stree came and rescued us, another feminist organization. Feminist friendship, feminist love, feminist emotions, relationships with our feminists and women's history. We also methodological sort of breakthrough where we wanted to foreground emotions as one of the most important archives of history. Antoinette talked about the archives. Archives are not just in boxes, but in our hearts and in our minds, which comes through our mouth and our lips when we say something, our oral narrative, what we feel, how we feel, how we want to unearth things. So all of this was an excellent journey. With that, I will turn to Jerry, maybe first to Barbara and then to Jerry, for like 7 minutes of interventions about how you feel our relationship. Yes, Swapna, you wanted to say something.
Will Padma say some few words?
Yeah,
Padma,
I think
sure.
Yeah, I'll
Padma,
just say a few words. I'll just cover what I think a lot of ground has been covered by Swapna and Paula together. I think all I want to say is that I'm so happy that this day has arrived. I think it's the most joyous and joyful event of this year, for me especially, because I've been, as many people pointed out, it has taken a whole decade. But it has finally arrived, and I hope all of you have seen this book. And if you haven't, you will probably see it very soon through the help of Moderators. And many have pointed out that this is a journey that started a long time ago. And I do recall one thing I do want to say about the 2-day panel of festive events, which were planned around the retirement mentors in 2013, was that I recall them as being 2 very happy days filled with emotion. I think almost everybody was in tears. There were tears of joy, really. And as one of the co-editors, I do want to give some idea as to why this project took so long to gestate and bear fruit. So I will simply cite what the editors decided we should put in the acknowledgements. It's on page 9, if you're interested. So I'm citing from there. There were extraordinary and life-changing events that overtook us in the last 9 years. All 3 of us lost our parents during this period. 2 of us underwent multiple surgeries and critical health issues. I have 2 bionic knees as a result. And some people think I'm a superwoman and I can run marathons, but I can assure you I cannot. During the pandemic, all 3 of us lost close members of our families and friends. And adding to this trauma of bereavement were the demands of a full-time professional and personal lives that continued quite mercilessly. But I want to be more positive about this decade that has passed by. I think it sustained us through those moments of anxiety and crisis, with our sheer faith in each other and the sisterhood that many have talked about now that we forged in the process. And in our regular chats, I remember laughing, crying, sharing our angst, and also reveling in our tiny achievements. Now, I would like to thank all the contributors and our mentors for keeping the trust in us and not abandoning us. You could have abandoned us, but you decided not to. So that's, and we're grateful to all of you for showing that forbearance and faith in us. When I look back at this crucial decade of planning, I realize how true Julia Kristeva's brilliant visual conjuring of the metaphor is, whereby she referred to women as the community of dolphins. For me, that evokes a lot. It's like as though we're a pod or school of dolphins who stay together in rain and sunshine. We hold hands in crisis, in joy. We ward off danger. We have signals to ward off danger. And in our collective, we have found friendship and meaning. So, we, the editors, have also learned lessons of diversity and inclusivity from our mentor. And with that in mind, when we met up in the hotel bar on several occasions during the 13 celebrations, we decided that we should represent different continents. The selection was based on this principle. As you all know, Swapna works in the US Academy, Paula from the Indian, and myself from Wales in the United Kingdom. And the contributors too to the volume represent different generations, locations, disciplines, topics, and themes. And I have to let you know that we did have a Dalit scholar, but as the years rolled on, and because she was on a tenure track and she needed her tenure track to be made permanent, she had to unfortunately withdraw from the project. But with this vision of global speech, networks, and connections, we hope to have fulfilled some of the ideals of our mentors, and only Jerry and Barbara can tell us whether we have. Now, today, I think the program is going to run for an hour and a half. And I'm sure all of you will agree with me when I say that it is too short on all counts. But we have to keep in mind the many constraints on various contributors and attendees today. So mindful of the time, I'm now going to pass the baton back to Aparna, Bashwati, and Paula as a moderator. So back to you, Paula.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Padma, for always being so lucid and clarifying the finer points of this project. So shall we move to Barbara now? Barbara, would you come and say what your relationship meant and what this process meant to you?
Well, it's been wonderful to be in this process and to have Paula, who was the first of my PhD. She almost didn't make it because at that time I was in India and she was applying and no one could understand her application because the Bengalis had started to do their Bengali thing and get rid of pure English. And so I came back and they said, we've got this thing. I had to come back for something and then go back to Britain. And I said, no. This is Bengal. We will take her. And she was actually working on American history. But then we had a wonderful relationships and I still remember her very, very gracious family. And her mother is the best cook on the earth, or was, and it was really, but Paula. And so that was how I first met Paula. And then one day I was at the University of Michigan and someone said to me, well, we have a new girl here who wants to do the history of India. So what do you think? And I said, well, let me talk to her. And so I, talked to her and I said, oh, yes, have her. On another occasion, we were walking at a conference and they were talking about who's going to be, two men were talking about who were going to be authors in the series of the Cambridge History of India. And so they asked me and I said, yes. And then I said, well, who's going to do women's history? And they said, women's history. And I said, yes, you have to have women's history. And Geraldine Forbes is the one who should do it. And so that is one way. We had known each other before, but that was one way that we got even closer, where we could talk about the trials of being in that system. But anyway, I would like to say that I started out as being a historian of India, and my first work was on Patiala, a princely state. So then I became interested in princely states, and that was told to me that I should take that, because this is 1960s. And so then by the 1970s, I thought we better have women's history here. We never mentioned them. And so there was a group at the University of Michigan, and we started to have conferences and even I would go up from Cincinnati to Ann Arbor, and we would have various groups come together. And it was always on the side. And it took very long in the United States to get it. Like even women's organizations didn't necessarily welcome us. And we had to tell them how wonderful we were and what we were doing with, really expanding the horizons of what constitutes history. Because in a sense, our work was with Jerry and I with the development of women's studies as a legitimate topic in universities that, should be supported, and that we should, and the thing for me, it introduced me to so many wonderful people around the world, and led sometimes to the delay in getting your articles done and your book, because I did the history of in the Cambridge volume. So Paula was the first of students to come, and I really enjoyed so much working with all of my PhD students, because they told me so much about India that I could not know from books or my own contacts there. So that it was really something that I think many of us within our institutions had to, our universities or whatever institutions we were in, to say, you have to talk about women. And I can see Laura Jenkins is here from the University of Cincinnati. And I remember that was one time that I thought I had power, because after she had talked about her research, the people in the political science department said, well, what do you think of her? And I said, well, you've got to get her. And so we have her, and and her husband is really shaking up the politics in Cincinnati, Democratic politics, so that it's been a 2-4. I can't say how wonderful it is to have met all of you people, and to, learn so much that I could not learn out of books. And of course, I was known for assigning too many books or articles to read, but what else could we do? Wonderful events in Madison where we could spread what we were doing, something that you weren't going to write about, but I think really what I wanted to do is to work with students. I loved all of my PhD students, and also some of them in the undergraduates who thought that I was really mean or nasty because they had to learn these names and stuff like that. But I think that it did them. I want to, and I particularly.
Barbara, you couldn't be nasty even if you tried. You just couldn't be nasty. That was not in you. You just couldn't be nasty. And I must, before moving on to Jerry, I must tell people about Barbara's birthday that we always celebrated in Madison. It was always a haluva wonderful party with Barbara and Jerry sharing the same room, and we sort of slowly trying to get into ways good stuff there to be had. Thank you so much, Barbara. Professor Forbes, Jerry, over to you for your reminiscences.
Paula, could I intervene? Is
Barbara done?
Priyanka.
Is Barbara, Professor Ramusa,
Knows
she
we
done?
have
Yeah,
7 minutes.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Just wanted
sure.
to
Yes.
My 7 minutes are done.
Yeah, so we already spoke to her about that.
Jerry.
Okay, so
Okay.
Jerry.
All right. Well, good morning and thank you. I think like a moment I'm going to start to cry. So, see everyone. You know, making this possible. Actually, Minnie and Antoinette and Sanja and Swapna, as I said ago, I told Swapna, look, you spend all this time. This could have been, I mean, that's about as much time as we spend on a book, right? 9, 10, 11 years. So they spent this much time on Barbara and it is Minnie and Antoinette, who we met either late 80s or changed the field. Both of them have contributed to have so much. So it's actually right. The two of them are so extraordinary. And then we have these kind of another generation when we get Paula, Swapna, and Padma, who've just been fabulous as writers and professional and moving this history forward. And I think this is I mean, it's been so amazing then to read all the articles. And I think, I don't know if you all know, they kept it a secret from Barbara and I. So I didn't even know who all was in the volume. I did not see the articles until I received the book. And actually, it was such a pleasure to read them. They're such good articles. And as I wrote to Paula, like, I had this article years ago when I was teaching or when I was writing or something like this, because it's like a game changer. I mean, so many excellent articles. And just really, it's such a good book with a great cover. I've known Mandira Sen since the 1990s, and I'm very grateful to have this. It's really a thrill to have it published by Stree. But so something about Barbara, who she perhaps doesn't remember. I met her in March of 1971, and my professor, Blair King, a historian, I think Gail wasn't yet teaching, and she said, Barbara, actually, I think I had just been offered a job, or yes, I'd just been offered a job. I just accepted the job at SUNY Oswego. And Blair said, you have to meet Barbara Ramusa. She's a historian, an employed historian, right? So it was the only woman he could think of in the history profession, South Asian history, who I could meet. And as was mentioned earlier about Paula, okay, so the first thing was, this is this gorgeous, fashionable woman, all right, like this long, flowing, golden brown hair and, you know, the extraordinary clothes and so on and so on. So I met Barbara in 1971. And then, as I remember, we really got back friends in 1976 when her visa was denied to work on certain topics. They decided, oh, women is a safe topic because I had just gotten a visa. So it's really interesting to think now, all right, thinking about politics worldwide, women, gender are not a safe topic now, right? Women in India, or even in the United States, right, where we just are banning abortion, and now in Idaho, well, birth control. So actually condoms become something, a negative subject or a disallowed subject. So it's like so interesting to think that back in the 1970s, it's like, oh, who cares about women? Like, just let anybody study this topic. But just in the same way back then, we could just get visas to study it. But we were also, I think, in our own departments, like, oh, you're doing women. And actually, I remember going to Calcutta, and I was, I won't mention the university, but there was this question about why was I only doing, like, I was invited by women's studies programs to talk, but not by a history department. And one male in that history department said, oh, you're doing gender, right? It was just like, okay, so this is where you belong. You don't belong in the mainstream history. So just thinking back, I mean, as Gail writes, like, this has changed. You know, when I just absolutely love the topic, the title. I'm just kind of finding of Gail's article about, you know, the kind of, we were all, starting out, gender meant women, and all women were in theory alike. So there's just, and we were all second-class citizens. So actually, it's fabulous to see Gail here. She's, you know, like the three of us, Gail, Barbara, and I, are like the really old timers in women's history. And I wanted to say one more thing about Barbara. You know, we go back a long time, but for me, she's the model, was the model, still is the model professional. She gave so much. She never said no, like to a reference or to mentoring a graduate student. She was on more committees than I could imagine. And she was somebody who encouraged me, you know, don't just be on your own university committees. Think about the Asian Studies Association. Think about the AHA. Think larger about the role you can play in terms of advancing women's history. I think I've probably taken up my time. I really just think that this is, for me, one of the things about the volume is making me think about like how far we've come since the 1970s. You people in this volume and in her story are addressing topics. Honestly, back then, I didn't imagine. I would look to see, has anybody written about this? You couldn't find anything. There were so few. Well, it was easy to read everything because there was so little. Now addressing new topics. And just, okay, the last thing I wanted to say, I love this about, you know, community of dolphins. I love your focus on the things that you said earlier about trust and friendships. And I think this is why our work means more to us. We all know each other, I think, in these very personal ways, as well as in terms of scholarship. So thank you. And I'll just listen to other people.
I think a round of
so
applause.
much, Jerry and Barbara. Really, I mean, these are the two women. On a very personal level, if somebody asks me, name a referee, I don't even refer to Barbara and Jerry. I just give their names, fully knowing that they will come up with glowing references. I mean, that's the kind of trust that is being there, and it is possible because of the extraordinary quality of these women. And now there is Padma, Swapna, everybody having my back. So, you know, I'm so lucky, and we're all so lucky in this community. And that is what we are celebrating today. But now we will ask an Amazon woman to talk about the project and the process, somebody who rescued the project, and that is Mundira Di. Mundira Sen from Stree. She took up the fresh shrift when most of the other publishers were not willing to take up, and we're very grateful to her. So Mundira Di, please say something. Mundira Di, you're muted.
Well, thank you, but I'm really a backroom woman, and I'm not half as articulate as all of you. Now, Stree started in 1990 to do women's studies, close on the heels of our friends Kali for Women. And in fact, it was these two little companies that did women's studies in India. The biggies kept away until the field was proved, and then they moved in. So in some ways, mapping women's history was very much something we would do. It's something that was intrinsic, was exciting. And although we were ignorant of Professor Barbara, the whole office calls her Barbara Didi because they cannot pronounce Ramusa. Barbara Didi, boita ache to. That's what they say. It's a book there. So, but we knew Jerry. And did we know Jerry? If we had not done this book, the entire family would have deposited me on the pavement. I mean, of course, I'm among her admirers, but so are they. And this is where Paula's insistence on the value of emotions, of feelings that build up our sisterhood is so key. I mean, that's exactly it. This book is about sisterhood. And that's what women's studies is or should be. That's the only place in academia where you do find it, I think. So mapping women's history is something we wanted to do. We couldn't call it a festschrift because the marketing people were in hysteria and said, don't you know it's stopped? Nobody does festschrifts. So I said, this is scholarship, it's not festschrift. And it's the scholarship of two remarkable gurumas. Would you agree with that, Paula? Two gurumas who have nurtured all these kids and brought them up.
Absolutely.
So they then piped down. But while we could see all that, I said, it's not just, you can actually see the results of Guruma's work because you have all these contributors, and this is a book that people are going to keep coming back to. It's not just going to be for 2 or 3 years. It's one of those lasting books. And we finally convinced them. And the thing is, the key points of retrieving voices, how do you do that? How do you build up an archive when there's almost nothing? I remember Anuradha Chanda years ago saying in Sylhet, she was so excited. She found these amazing diaries by a Sylheti woman on her handiwork. You know, she was a great sewing person and a seamstress, and goodness knows she had kept all these records. But that is a source of her time and things like that. And this is something new that women's studies did. It's the women's movement actually threw up saying, look at different things as sources. And that's in the book. So I think that excited us. All the contributors' pieces were very pleasing, I think, to some people. They liked, they could relate. I mean, we do have readers outside who come in and look at the book occasionally. They liked Durba Ghosh's piece on Kalpana Dutt and Jerry's archive, but most people just loved all the pieces. And I think students will come back to them again and again and see how you get together, how you write history, and what women's contribution are. We're not going to hear that, oh, women did nothing, or, well, if they did, I think there were two famous American historian women who sort of wrote off Indian women, weren't there? Was it Mary Daly and Professor Miriam or something? Well, you heard that in India too. And of course, you always heard that women never did any work. They don't do work right now, by the way, either, just because they don't get paid. And that's why the work participation rate is so low. But I mean, if they didn't do the work at home, the whole society would collapse. So I think it's a year that you look at women in a new way, perhaps eventually appreciating them for what they are. I think that comes through very clearly in this book, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mundiradi. Thank you so much to all of you. Now, Padma and Swapna, should we turn to the, the people, the contributors to the volume, unless you both have something to say?
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to say. It's the program should follow the contributors alphabetically and then the audience.
Yes. So let's start with Sanjam. Sanjam Ahluwalia. By virtue of your A, you get to go first.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Thanks so much. It's really an absolute delight and a pleasure and an honor to be part of this celebratory gathering where we are felicitating two stalwarts of Indian feminist historical scholarship, Barbara and Jerry. I'll use my time to talk about Barbara, who's been my mentor and teacher and a very dear friend for close to 3 decades now. My first introduction to Barbara was through a 4-page letter, the one that she sent me in India when I was getting ready to apply for graduate schools in the US. It was her letter, which is now a very special part of my own personal archive, that convinced me about applying and then coming to UC for doctorate in history. And this was really one of the most rewarding decisions of my life. The mentoring I received from Barbara, graduate student, has been one of the most powerful influences in my professional career. I'm sure I'll really be able to do that in all Barbara has done my professional and personal life as a wonderful mentor, a very generous colleague, and a feminist role model that we've all been talking about. So my earliest acquaintance with Barbara came through my readings of the All India Women's Conference, Archives in New Delhi, and my search for academic writings on the history of birth control in colonial India. I read the AIWC debates through Roshni, their journal, and I really lamented to friends in DU about a complete lack of secondary scholarship on the subject. And it was during my very first academic journal on the topic, which was really lacking within Indian historiography or modern Indian history, I should say. The article was of the debates over birth control in India. And on my quest to date is one of the most important in the fields and a necessary citation for anyone who's reading or writing on this subject. In my scholarly work, I'm of course deeply indebted to Barbara's rich scholarship and exhaustive archival research. It was her initial feminist academic labor that made it possible for me to undertake and successfully complete my dissertation and my first project. It was Barbara's superb mentoring that helped me clarify and articulate my project. Barbara was, as we all know, she was the pioneer in bringing attention to the field of reproductive histories within Indian historiography. She demonstrated as being a pioneer, she demonstrated an amazing generosity in sharing archival sources, but she also took great delight at the same time in my own explorations of the subject. In her mentoring, she was at once both extremely supportive and yet critical. While pushing me to make arguments well supported by evidence, she simultaneously created professional opportunities for me to present my work at conferences. The very first presentation of my work was at CUNY. I was one of the participants on a panel titled Rethinking National Feminist Histories, the Politics of Location and Boundaries. This panel was organized and conceived by Barbara. It was organized generationally. There were 3 generations of feminist historians narrating our very different yet interlinked intellectual trajectories. Antoinette was very much a part of this panel. It was in 2000. Given that I research and publish in a field that Barbara largely conceived and created through her own archival labor and feminist interest, she has been a model mentor. Far from jealously guarding the turf, she has been a feminist collaborator par excellence, sharing her expertise without limiting my own horizons or even pulling me back from debate, discussions, and at times disagreements with her own work. Her academic generosity and feminist credentials really came through in most all my interactions with her in the classroom as well and as a TA. I can still recall the joy and pleasure of learning in classes that I took with Barbara at UC. In her classes, she was open to discussions again and to disagreements and healthy academic conversations and debate. So not only has Barbara been a role model in shaping my research work, but also in modeling my pedagogical approaches and classroom interactions. I feel really fortunate to have had the opportunity to learn from an outstanding guru, or Guru Ma, as Mandira just put it here. Or as sometimes she herself called herself my Dr. Mutta, which I think is really very befitting. Barbara took great pleasure in teaching students about a part of the world largely unfamiliar to them and made that faraway world, time, and place come alive for them, for us, in ways that only an experienced teacher can. It is, of course, her own long-standing intellectual and personal investment in the field, places, and peoples of India that allowed her to convey the richness and vibrancy of a culture and history so different from that of the students she taught at UC. Again, something I hope to emulate in my teaching and similarly inspire the next generation of students. Thank you, Barbara, for all you've done for your students, colleagues, and most of all, for the field of South Asian women's and gender history, along with your dear friend, Jerry. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjam. Really, I mean, both Jerry and Barbara. Barbara's was the first Gurukul that I went to, and then it was Jerry's. You've been really amazing. Now I will turn to my other sister with whom we worked for like 10 years together. Padma, over to you.
Thank you, Paula. I feel that I have already been given a great opportunity to recount my experiences and my connections with both Jerry and Barbara, but I'll try and cover what I'm not covered in the book today. Now, I think when I started out in the 1990s, thinking through the grander conceptual and theoretical issues that govern a study of women and gender, I can also say that it witnessed, at that time, I felt that it witnessed the rise of post-structuralism and postmodernism. The very idea of language as embodying the meaning of life, signs and symbols as representations of lived realities, this had taken off spectacularly. And of course, we know closer home, in India, we had Recasting Women, that volume which made terrific changes to how we view history, how we view gender and women's history in India, along with the post-colonialism as inaugurated by the subaltern studies. Now, one of the things I also saw at this time was that these very exciting new trends were also being challenged by scholars such as Laura Lee Downs, who famously took on Joan Scott on her head, bang on her head, asking a moot question. If woman is a category, then why am I afraid to walk in the night? Referring to experience being an important category of analysis as well, you know. So, I mean, of course, you know, that debate took off and there have been many different strands and people have sides and so on. But when I felt as though I had just then finished my PhD, or I was about to submit my PhD, already had a full-time job at this time. And I felt that, you know, I think my own view at this time was that while all this was invigorating young scholars like myself, I also found myself confounded and confused at the same time. So around this time, I did find that Jerry and Barbara's numerous offerings very comforting. And they were comforting not because they did not have theory or concept, so please don't mistake me on that. It was far from it. I found that no matter what they wrote about, whether it was suffrage, women's rights, women's cookbooks, women's personal narratives, or women's access to legal rights, imperialism, or nationalism, one thing that I found they did very well was they anchored women firmly in those studies. And a woman's perspective was never lost sight of. I found this anchor gave centrality and meaning to their works, and I've tried to follow that as yet uncoded and unwritten rule, but a fantastic one in my own words. And it is with that perspective, I chose to write the article that you see embedded in this volume today, Mapping Women's History. And it is titled The Naveen Stree or New Woman, Male Reformers and Alternative Hegemonies in the Higher Educational Enterprises of Colonial Maharashtra. Because for me, I feel that every act of domination and power expressed by the British state or by indigenous men, we find enough interstices of resistance and protest by indigenous authorities as well. So by paying attention to women's voices, I could put together an alternative hegemony of Maharashtrian elites in the control of women's agency. And it is in this finding that I contest Gauri Vishwanathan's thesis about the hegemony of the British state in Indian education. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the powerful lesson I have been learning from our mentors was that we need not worry so much about not paying attention to gender relations. Gender relations will always expose itself, provided we're paying attention to women's own voices. The latter will not reveal itself unless we as women's scholars pay rigorous attention to it. So that's where I would stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Padma. Now I will have my own 2 bits. And I will talk about the time when I was a graduate student. I was a graduate student with Barbara in the late 80s and early 90s. Those were the sort of exciting days of women's activism in India. I remember we talked at length about Seva. Barbara introduced me to Manushi. Barbara also introduced me to the Chipko movement, where, we know the actions of Gaura Devi, which are all now in the pages of women's history, and which has all become part of the general history of India. But Barbara was one person who told me and who taught me that activism does not mean hatred. She had so much graciousness, she had so much love that she clearly revealed to me, I am a belligerent person. I argue. I constantly, I am one of those argumentative Indians. But Barbara really showed me the graciousness. And every time I tried to foreground Gaura Devi, she kept saying, yes, Gaura Devi is very important, but don't forget the contributions of Sundar Lal Bahuguna. So she was the person who really taught me what sisterhood, what camaraderie, what group actions meant. She was the person who for the first time told me, in India, nothing succeeds unless there is a mass action behind that. And to build up a mass action, you need what Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain had prominently said, men and women together and other genders together to work together for a particular cause. So thank you so much, Barbara, for being such a wonderful, wonderful mentor, such a gracious friend, such a host, everything. I owe so much to you. And I'm so glad that today is my chance to say thank you, and I will always cherish that. And Jerry, you nurtured my love towards Northeast. You and me, we have been comrades in arm where Northeast and women is concerned. Nobody really tried to work on women and Northeast. I went to Nagaland as a graduate returnee in the early 1990s. And I saw what Nagaland was all about. There was no ceasefire at that point of time, but it was the underground movement, both men and women, who allowed me to stay, who allowed me to find out stories and narratives from their bunkers, and to make me unlearn things about nationalism. And for that, I have to thank you, Jerry, because you pushed me also towards the Northeast. And I don't know whether Professor Shomadar is here or not. He's another person who pushed me towards Northeast and activism and nurtures this activism that I always, called my own. And I think I'm one of those very proud comrades who bring this whole notion of scholar activist to the forefront in the academic world today. So thank you, Jerry. Without our nights of whiskey and long conversations, I don't think I would have sustained through the politics of academia. So thank you both. This has been a marvelous journey, and I wish I could give even half of what you all gave me to my students who are here today. So with that, I will stop, and I will ask Swapna, do we have any taped messages from either Durba or Shoban or Antoinette?
No, not yet, Paula. So you just go ahead to the next.
We will then turn to Gail. Gail, may we hear your Yes, you're muted, by the way.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry that Shaban is not here, because I wanted to mention her work on women's autobiographies that I got involved in also, in organizing those wonderful sessions that she got funding for, and we had 3 women's autobiography in Muslim world conferences, first in Austin, and then in Delhi, and then in Sharjah. So first of all, I loved the volume. Thank you very much for all of it. I was surprised and pleased to be the first article. I didn't realize that was going to be, and it's humbling to be in that position. It's so nice to see so many old friends, Minnie and Barbara and Jerry, and new friends like Swapna. And I also see my student Manu Bhagavan here. He's just completed, not sure if it's out yet or not, but a biography of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, which I am looking forward to. I think that there are only 2 things I have really to say. First of all, to encourage everyone here and their students to continue their looking for and discovering, finding sources, new archives to unearth and to donate them to libraries, to get them in places where researchers can use them. My own collection of Urdu sources on Indian women and Indian women's behavior and cookbooks and so forth and so on, I gave it all to the University of Texas Library. I kept a few things for myself, but mostly I donated it. And then there's something that I did not write in my article, which I worked on subsequently, and that is the life of Zegheshin, who was a poet in Urdu in the early 20th century. Her dates were from 1894, I believe, to 1922, a very short life. But she was a very eloquent poet. And in our series of autobiography conferences, I did give one paper about her work. Zegheshin was the Takhalus, or the pen name of Zahida Khatun Sherwani. She was from Aligarh. She spent her entire life in Parda. She never went out. And yet her voice was tremendously, her voice was heard because she was able to publish in women's magazines and in literary magazines in the Urdu world, in Hyderabad, in Lucknow, and so on. And I wrote a paper about her life and about her poetry, wondering if it was possible to discern an autobiography in her poetry, even though poetry is universal. I translated this long poem, which I ultimately took a piece of and turned it into a song. It was a song that my chorus here in Austin commissioned a composer to write the song, and we performed it last spring. And now, with what's going on in Iran, I think it's worthwhile quoting this poem, which I translated into English from Urdu. It's called I Am a Ruby. I'm giving up using my comb. I'm refusing to return the mirror's gaze. I have no heart nor zest for self-displays. In any case, I am radiant of face, but if no one can observe, what use is grace? If someone is so inclined, let him change my mind. I am a spectacle, all alone, neither displayer nor displayed. I am a ruby wrapped in a rag. The moon in darkened phase. I am a rustic beauty, a blossom in a desolate place. Like gold buried in the dust, or a pearl lost in the sea, a candle under a cover, or in a void, the song of the Shana'i. Why is the nightingale caged? Why was Yusuf enchained? Whose idea was that? What wisdom so ordained? What a shocking view it is that beauty can be seen as unfortunate. The company of rivals, like a candle, I weep. Even with this beauty, in spite of all this grace, I cannot find the words my meaning to express. How can one so powerless make clear her great distress? I am a ruby wrapped in a rag. The moon in its darkness pays. I am a rustic beauty, a blossom in a desolate place. Those are the lyrics to the song that we sang in Chorus Austin last spring. I have an YouTube recording of that concert, if anyone is interested. And in retrospect, I think it should be dedicated to the women of Iran who are upsetting the apple cart in their country right now. I don't know how it'll turn out, but I'm sure there will be poetry about it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Gail, for bringing poetry in our midst, which is so important in Vibid's narratives. And from one stalwart to another now, Minnie, can you come in now and say a few words?
Well, I want to start with thanking Aparna, Baswati, and Mandira Sen for making this volume possible. It's such an incredible volume. I've been enjoying dipping into it, and I'm looking forward to reading more. And of course, to Swapna, Paula, and Padma, huge congratulations. And this is just such a labor of love. Thank you. To Barbara and Jerry, the two people who the provocation for this event and for this volume. How can we ever thank you enough for all that you've done? I hope this volume is some small token of that. And I hope we have many more celebrations of the two of you. This is just the beginning. So I'm looking forward to many more. When I think of Barbara and Jerry, I often think of them together. Rena Oldenburg said very famously that they were the odd couple of South Asian studies. And in some ways, that's been my interaction with them. It's hard to kind of keep them apart. But I do want to speak about them separately because as I was thinking about today, I realized that actually they both have had very different kinds of impact on me. I'm not going to talk much about their scholarship. partly because I think this volume is testimony to that. But also, I think almost everything I do, I feel their influence, and it's hard to actually put them in words. So perhaps more about how they shaped me. I start with Jerry because I met Jerry first. I was a Callow graduate student visiting some friends up in Syracuse, and they took me to see Jerry. And that was such a big occasion because I knew Jerry then, not as a women's historian, but as the historian who wrote Positivism in Bengal, an incredible book that I had loved. So looked forward to going seeing her and Skip. They were such gracious hosts. We had such a wonderful time talking, that in the end, that evening became dinner, and Jerry quickly cooked dinner for all of us. I don't remember if any of us helped her, but she managed to cook for 4 people, and we continued our conversation. And in some ways, that was my introduction to Jerry, this kind of love of ideas, of adda, of good fun. She introduced me to Bengal. I went to do my research there. Jerry was my first Bengali friend. And of course, every time where I went in Bengal, especially in Kolkata, people would say, "What are you doing? Jerry's already done that." So anyone doing anything with gender or women, Jerry had done that. And it was very annoying. You know, I'd meet people and they'd say, "Oh, no, don't bother. Jerry's already done that. She's done all of that." And I did discover, not then, but much later, that actually they were right. Because when I was doing my subsequent work, I looked through Jerry's collection at the British Archives, the British Library, Jerry's archives. And, you know, this piggybacks on Gail's point about the importance of archives. When going through Jerry's papers, I was amazed at the kinds of things she had collected, found, the people she had interviewed. If you haven't used that collection, that is absolutely mind-blowing. So to Jerry, thank you for introducing me to the world of Bengal, to the world of women's history, and to just so much more. It's just been incredible. Barbara I met slightly later. My advisor and Barbara were at the National Humanities Center together. And my advisor, wonderful person, but really was not in my field and always wondered what to do with me. And I think he was very happy to meet Barbara and kind of pass me on to her as well. And so I wrote to Barbara after that. I knew her from her lovely essay, Catalysts or Helpers. You know, took the courage to write to her. Well, I didn't get the 4-page letter that Sanjam got, but something close. You know, I got really wonderful comments from her, and she took me on, like both of them did, as, you know, their students in a way. So even though I was not formally their student, I always think of both of them as, and I always think that I am their student together. Barbara, I have to tell one story about Barbara, which is so typical of her. Early in my career, she invited me to a conference on feminism and imperialism at Cincinnati. I think Jerry was there as well as some other people here. And it was amazing. This was a conference where there were a lot of big egos, a lot of showboating, a lot of people to manage. And Barbara was incredible. I mean, everyone wanted to be at this conference to see what was going on. Some were invited, some weren't, big names from everywhere. She was so good at managing all of those egos, making sure that, you know, young people like us, you know, graduate students were heard and not drowned out by, you know, all of this noise. And Jerry is really correct in pointing out that with Barbara, you learned so much about the profession, you know, about departmental politics, about professional associations. So together, thank you both for shaping me as an intellectual, as a professional, and I hope a little as a human being. Your generosity has been incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mini. Thanks a ton. Now, Priyanka Srivastava.
Thank you. So first of all, it is an absolute honor to be a part of this wonderful tribute to the two pioneering feminist scholars, Geraldine Forbes and Barbara Ramusa. I would also like to thank the three editors, Paula, Padma, and Swapna, for their tireless work in getting this volume published. I would start with Barbara because Barbara was my advisor. She's a mentor forever. I knew about Barbara before meeting her in person. When I was planning to come to the United States, I was working in Delhi at the Center for Women and Development Studies, and when my two senior colleagues there, Beena Mazumdar and Lotika Shorkar, they heard about my plans. They said, "Okay, go and work with Barbara." So I knew of her, before coming here. And then before applying to UC, to the graduate school of UC, I traveled from Columbus to Cincinnati. I took the Greyhound bus and I had written to Barbara, and she was there waiting for me to pick me up from Greyhound bus station. She treated me to lunch. She talked very patiently about my planned project and gave me advice about how to apply, how to craft my statement of purpose. So she was a mentor even before she became my formal advisor. So I have learned so much. It is really difficult to talk about Barbara's role in my academic and professional life in 3 to 5 minutes. But I would say that working with Barbara, starting in 2004, has been a turning point in my life. I have learned about the craft of history, using women and gender, using gender as a category of analysis, even though I consider myself a historian of labor. So as I worked on labor and gender history for my dissertation, and as I was turning my dissertation into a book, because of the motivation and encouragement I got from Barbara, I managed to develop the framework of well-being to look at the history of labor. And that framework allowed me to incorporate women and gender history as an inherent and essential part of labor history, and also to look at the tensions between productive wage work of women workers and their unpaid reproductive work. And Barbara's work, her scholarship, her generosity continues to shape my life as a researcher and also as a teacher. So I would say that I would forever be grateful for your mentorship and your help in shaping me as a scholar and as a professional academic. Jerry, I have known, and I would also like to thank Barbara for introducing me to this wonderful tribe of historians of women and gender. And in that context, I met Jerry, who has always been ready with advice whenever I sought her advice. So she has been a wonderful presence in my academic life. So thank you so much for being there for all of us, for me, and I would forever be grateful. That's it.
Thanks a lot. So, Swapna, Padma, now open the floor for people. If you want to comment, just raise your hand. There's this hand icon, just press that, and we will request you to speak about your relationship to Jerry, Barbara, or anything that you would like to talk about here. Srimoti, please, Srimoti.
I was going to call her out. Good.
Srimati, can you switch on your microphone and your camera, or at least the microphone?
There you are.
Go ahead, Srimati, over to you.
Srimati, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Something is wrong. Srimati, can you switch on, look at your microphone or something? Anyone else? Then we can come back to Srimati. If someone else has...
Is Sonia still there? Okay. Serena Cheyenne. We can see her here. I can't see her here, Paula. If Serena could start, but Srimati, we cannot hear you. Try your microphone again, please. Yeah. Oh, there is Serena. Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
I want to start by saying thank you for the work everyone on this panel's been doing. I think it's obviously really important to talk about women's history in India, especially because, having grown up as part of the diaspora here in the UK, there's just so little information about Indian history. And it's sort of further narrowed down and meshed with things like Black History Month. So there's even smaller discussion about women's role in Indian history. So it's great that you guys are actually doing something about it. I'm actually a second-year doctoral student at Cardiff University, and Padma's my primary supervisor. And so I actually wanted to say thank you to Geraldine, because this was about 2 years ago, so you might not even remember this. I'd be really surprised if you did, because I actually got into academia through serendipitous circumstances. The only reason I'm here is basically because of you. So I was doing my master's at Royal Holloway in London, and we were supposed to do a final project as part of our final assignment. So especially because of the pandemic, I had to change my project. So I decided to do a podcast called The Power of Pesa. And it's about which historical figure you would like to see on the rupee note. It's because Gandhi's so sort of prominent. He's on every note. So I invited a few academics like Priya Atwal, Vinita Damodaran, and Padma was on my third episode. I actually emailed you, Geraldine, asking if you wanted to be part of it, and you were the one who said, it's a really interesting project, I like it, but I'm really busy and I would like to direct you to some of these other academics, and one of them was Padma. And I think Padma was, so interested in the original conception and the idea of the podcast, and obviously she spoke about Babita Ramabai. So then it just eventually became a regular correspondence, and she said, I'd really like it if you could do your PhD in Cardiff University. And I thought, well, there's a kind of there's a sign for it, but I'd never in my kind of wildest dreams thought that something like that would happen, especially because I was looking for a sign about whether to stay in academia or to just jump straight into the job market, or something like that. So it's actually quite thanks to you that I've even made these kind of connections, and that I'm basically sitting here right now. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Serena. Srimati, maybe you can try once again.
Manu is there.
Manu has raised a hand. Srimati, probably you can put it in the chat. So Manu, do you want to come in now, please?
Sure. I had to turn off my camera a couple of times because I teared up, just thinking and reflecting on these absolutely wonderful people. I've known Barbara a very long time. My first work, my PhD work, was on princely states with Dr. Minot, and one of the first things that she suggested was that I reach out to Barbara Ramusa to see if she would offer some suggestions. And not only did she offer suggestions, but she essentially took me in as a kind of distant student, and she was there all the time, counseling and just treating me as one of her own. So the thing that I learned most from that, I learned a lot about princely states from her, but the thing that I learned most was that the generosity and loving affection, the care that she and this entire generation, I think, of scholars who worked on India is just so unmatched. It's so unbelievable. And all of us just owe so much to them. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is try to carry on that legacy. They're huge names. They're pioneers in the field. And yet, I mean, they're the most humble and egoless kind of people. I can't think of anything of a bigger honor than to say something like that. I mean, I think that's the most admirable of all qualities. And so we walk in your footsteps, and we walk in your footsteps academically, but we also, I think, have to try to follow in your lead in terms of character. That's very hard to do. It's just so hard to do. But we really love and admire you, and we thank you for everything you've done. And we will do our best moving forward. I just also, it's just so wonderful to see so many old and familiar faces. It's been a long time since I've seen some of you. But I hope we can see each other in person. That's the only thing maybe this particular gathering is missing. It would be nice to do this in person at some point. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before going to Laura, I will just recount one anecdote, very short. I became the vice chancellor of a university and everybody was congratulating me. Barbara was the only person who said, why did you have to leave Calcutta University and go to this, take up this position of vice chancellor? You should have remained in Calcutta University and did your books. You were a good scholar, so, get back to scholarship and leave the administration. So thank you so much, Barbara, for being the corrective. Now I will request Laura. Laura, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Can you hear me? I'd just like to say a few words. First of all, congratulations to the editors and the contributors. And of course, Barbara and Jerry for this volume, both for its intellectual contribution and also it's clearly a labor of love that has come to fruition. So congratulations to you all. Just a few words about Barbara's amazing influence in my life. When I showed up at the University of Cincinnati, I met her at my interview and was really glad that she was there at my job talk. And ever since then, kind of an icon for me about how to navigate academia, South Asian studies, etc. Different ways of doing academia, I think, is one thing I learned from her. First of all, we've talked a lot about her style. I think her mentoring style, in addition to her impeccable clothing, is something that I've really tried to emulate because in political science, it can be very cutthroat. I'm sure it can in history too. And so she kind of showed me just a different way of caring for students, which we've heard again and again today. I also have always been inspired by her stories from the trenches and how far things have come, but yet she's always maintained her sense of joy and fun. So many people would become bitter by going through a lot of, blatant sexism and other things in academia. And Barbara just handles it with such grace. Has inspired me to temporarily jump in and out of administrative roles, but preserve my research time. So Paula, I took that advice too. I want to take on leadership roles because there's not many women doing them, but also to keep coming back to scholarship. So that's also something I learned from Barbara. So so many other things as well. I appreciate the invitation to come into this conclave for today. We should have more conclaves in political science, clearly. I really love it. So congratulations, Barbara, and also Jerry, for all your wonderful work over the years and influence on so many, many people.
Thank you so much. We are past 9 o'clock in India, so we should be sort of winding up. Swapna and Padma, if you agree, maybe we'll ask Barbara and Jerry to say a few words before we wind up. Yes.
Paula, if you could read out what Srimati wrote on her chat, and then I would like
having
to say a few words.
Internet issues. If I open the chat window, I think I'll be thrown out. So if you can do it, please.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So this comes from Srimati. It is so wonderful, and I'm reading her text. It is so wonderful to see you all here and to remember, as Manu just said, what intellectual communities of care look like. Not only did I meet Jerry because my advisor didn't know what to do with me, like Minnie's, met Minnie as a grad student, got to know Barbara better when I moved to Kentucky. So many wonderful and almost serendipitous trajectories, including all of you who were with me in undergraduate college. Thank you all for being our forever mentors in style and scholarship and inspiration. I will, take up the cue and say a few words because, Srimati, Paula, and I, we all go, and I think we have Shima and Debjani here as our audiences. We all go back to our undergrad days and our college in Presidency College. But I just want to echo and continue on with what Manu, my close colleague at CUNY, and Srimati mentioned. This is indeed a very special occasion and an opportunity to celebrate our mentors, our gurus, and share publicly. This is a rare moment to share our acknowledgement, our indebtedness, not especially to Barbara and Jerry, but to many other mentors and our advisors. Here we have, I must start with David Ludden, who was the first historian I met in this country. David knows how many, if he remembers, for how many decades we go back, and who always challenged me, but also sustained me until today as I speak in so many different ways. We have, our Minnie, and Antoinette is not here, who really, really, nurtured us as our elder sisters. None of us in the US academia would have been here without their presence in our lives. So the baton is being passed on through generations. One particular aspect of the volume, I don't want to get into the scholarship, but I just want to convey to the readers and the audiences is that one of the values of this, our volume, along with her story that Bhashwati and Aparna edited, is that they bring together the values of international feminism that Minnie wrote for so many years now, and several others explored it in different ways, Sanjam and others, and so many of us. But the value of these volumes lies in charting, in outlining the history of how women's history is not bounded by territories, by regions, by ethnicities, and women/gender history is all encompassing. And what our volume does, it charts the beginning of women's studies and women's history in the US academia, and how scholars from different corners, like how Jerry and Barbara work closely with the founding members of the Women's Studies Association, of the National Women's Studies Association here. How Dr. Flores went to India and how men participated in it. So just like, I mentioned David, just like Manu, we all cared for each other. It's not a gender segregated, sex segregated field. We have been nurtured by many people. So that's, and I also was not a direct student of Barbara or Jerry, but they have been in my life as mothers, as foremothers, as mothers, as the most caring people I can turn to. They always had my backs whenever I needed them. So, and there are numerous instances. I met Barbara first at the Women's Studies at Berks, actually, when I first Minnie. Also heard, probably, I don't remember, Minnie, whether you graduated then or not. It was at Vassar College. I was just floored by her glowing presentation. That's when I met Barbara. And then I met Jerry actually in India, whose work I was familiar with, but we were on a fellowship, both on AIIS, when I finally encountered Jerry, and they have been permanent, members in my life. There is hardly a day when I don't think about Barbara one way or the other. So I won't take up any more time. I have requested Professor Amin to join us back because she also has a very, very long connection with Jerry and Barbara. And if she could say a few words, I know we are going, overboard, but we will wrap up very shortly.
Yeah, and we needed Professor Sonia Amin because we didn't have anybody from Bangladesh. And you are such an important feature in our lives. Professor Amin, please say a few words.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really overwhelmed to see such an array of women's historians across generations. And it's really a cause to celebrate. And I look forward to the book. And it's been such an enriching evening. But to cut it short, I'll just talk about the three people who are, in a sense, who have been my long-distance mentors. That's Barbara Ramusa, Gail Minon, and Jerry, of course, Geraldine Forbes. I have been the closest to Jerry, so she's like a Didi. I always say I have a Didi in women's history. So it's there in the book, in the first shift. Whatever I had to say, I poured out all my feelings. So can I just congratulate everybody? And I wish more people from my corner of the earth had been participating, on a rather cautionary note or a depressing note or a thoughtful note, a note for a thought. I would love to see more engagement. We are celebrating, and I see, all of you there. I see it in India, and of course, it's partly our duty also. But it's wonderful to see so many people today, and so I'll just say good night, good morning, whatever, and lots of new endeavors to look forward to. And thank you for allowing me to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now let's move on to Barbara. Barbara, any closing comments?
Well, I've enjoyed this very, very much because we haven't had our conferences here in the United States where we can talk about these things, and to know that, I'm going to be celebrating my 85th anniversary, November 5th, and that, I had a life that has been really, really glorious because, you bring back hearing you talk, such wonderful memories of, what we did in India, what we did in the United States. And so I feel so fortunate and that, I have had this past life. And so thank you all for what you've done.
Thank you so much.
Jerry?
Jerry?
Next.
This has been very moving, and so, there's lots of nose blowing, tears coming. One thing I just want to conclude with is that for me, okay, when, I talk about how much Barbara was a mentor to me, but to go back even like a step to India, actually, Neera Desai and Veena Majumdar in different ways and were my guides. And C.S. Lakshmi was my sister. Or still is. But Neera Desai, we were talking about this caring. All right. So those days we smoked, Veena Majumdar and I smoked endless cigarettes and drank endless cups of tea, talking about women's history, which she said, you can work on that because you can just sit in an archive and sit around all day, and it's not like we have to like try and change the world we're living in a very activist way. So, and Neera Desai, it was snacks and train travel and tea and my first video bus travel and staying with her in Mumbai and staying with her in, it just, again, you're talking about this caring and personal lives, and the personal is political. So I feel that, and then I'm not mentioning all the other mentors I had in India, many of them male. So we go back to just, how people have, you were talking, I think that community of care. And I think this is something that I'm hearing and listening to and very moved by today. So thank you. It's more than just the intellectual. It's all about our personal relationships. Thank you so much, all of you.
At least for one evening, we proved that the feminist movement is all about inclusivity. Rather than being exclusive. So Swapna, Padma, last words. Would you like to say something? Swapna did say a few things as closing comments, but would you like to say something? If not, then I will say bye-bye to all of us. Be with us. Let's form a community so we can have each other's back. Because, there is always this conspiratorial element. If women's movement is not subversive, it's nothing. And the subversive part of it is we are celebrating Barbara and Jerry, but we are also celebrating ourselves. So in that note, let us celebrate ourselves, our sisterhoods, and our lives, love yourselves, and let's continue the feminist movement. Thank you so much. So with that, we will end the formal session.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula ji, Swapna ji. Bye-bye, Jerry.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Aparna.
It's been a wonderful session. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, Swapna and Paula and Padma. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Aparna and Vasu.
Welcome. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you for making it happen. Had a chat for a very long time.
Yes.
I will call you.
Bye.
Bye. Talk to you.
Okay.
Bye, guys.